Secretary Panetta.
Chairman Levin, Senator Imhoff, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to discuss the terrorist attacks on our facilities in Benghazi on September 11, 2012. Before I go into my testimony, let me just state my deepest thanks to all of you for the support and friendship that I've had with all of you on both sides of the aisle. I've had the honor to, in many ways, live the American dream as a son of Italian immigrants in the various capacities that I've had to serve this country. The greatest privilege I think I've had is to serve as an elected member in the House and had the opportunity to work with many of you in that capacity, and then as member of the executive branch had the opportunity to work with you as well. I thank you for your dedication to the country, and I thank you for your willingness to serve the United States. On that tragic day, as always, the Department of Defense was prepared for a wide range of contingencies. I just would remind you that the NCTC, in the 6 months prior to that attack, identified some 281 threats to U.S. diplomats, diplomatic facilities, embassies, ambassadors, and consulates worldwide. Obviously, Benghazi was one of those almost 300 areas of concern. But unfortunately, there was no specific intelligence or indications of an imminent attack on the U.S. facilities in Benghazi. And frankly, without an adequate warning, there was not enough time, given the speed of the attack, for armed military assets to respond. That's not just my view or General Dempsey's view. It was the view of the Accountability Review Board that studied what happened on that day. In the months since the tragedy at the temporary mission facility and the nearby annex in Benghazi, we've learned that there were actually 2 short-duration attacks that occurred some 6 hours apart. And again, there was no specific intelligence that indicated that a second attack would occur at the annex, which was located some 2 miles away. The bottom line is this, that we were not dealing with a prolonged or continuous assault, which could have been brought to an end by a U.S. military response. Very simply, although we had forces deployed to the region, time, distance, the lack of an adequate warning, events that moved very quickly on the ground prevented a more immediate response. Despite the uncertainty at the time, the Department of Defense and the rest of the United States government spared no effort to do everything we could to try to save American lives. Before, during, and after the attack, every request the Department of Defense received, we did, we accomplished. But again, 4 Americans' lives were lost, and we all have a responsibility to make sure that that does not happen again. The 4 Americans who perished in Benghazi, Ambassador Stevens, Information Management Officer Sean Smith, and the security personnel, all were heroes and all were patriots. I had the opportunity to join the President, Secretary Clinton, and other officials at Andrews Air Force Base for the dignified transfer ceremony when those bodies of those heroes were returned home, and I had the opportunity to meet with their families. I believe we all have a solemn responsibility to these families and to all the diplomatic personnel who put themselves at risk to find out exactly what happened, to bring those involved to justice, and to make sure that we're doing everything possible to prevent it from happening again and to ensure the safety of our personnel and facilities worldwide. To that end, the Department of Defense has fully supported efforts by Congress and the State Department to review the events and decisions surrounding the attacks in Benghazi. We have made every effort to respond promptly to numerous requests for additional information, to provide briefings, to provide testimony to members and committees in the Congress. In fact, General Dempsey and I were among the very first U.S. government senior officials to brief Congress on this tragedy. We appeared before this committee on September 14th, 2012, 3 days after the attack, and provided the best information we had at that point as to what had taken place. Additionally, the Defense Department participated in classified briefings and answered questions from the Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security Oversight Committees, even when we were not called to testify. We've also provided all requested support to the Accountability Review Board that was co-chaired by Ambassador Pickering and by Admiral Mullen. Based on the information we've compiled and the reviews that we've conducted, let me describe for you DoD's response to the events on September 11th, some of the lessons that we've learned, and the adjustments we are making to our global force posture given continuing unrest throughout North Africa and the Middle East. In fact, in many places, if we get the heads up that we need, the changes we made have already resulted in early decisions to deploy additional security or withdraw diplomatic staff in advance of a crisis, from Central America to Khartoum, from Tunisia to Yemen, from Egypt to Mali, and others. While DoD does not have the primary responsibility for the security of U.S. diplomatic facilities around the world, we do work closely with the State Department and support them as requested. In the months prior to the Benghazi attack, as I've said, we had received from the intelligence community almost 300 reports on possible threats to American facilities around the world. Over the course of the day on September 11th, General Dempsey and I received a number of reports of possible threats to U.S. facilities, including those in Cairo, Egypt. But there were no reports of imminent threats to U.S. personnel or facilities in Benghazi. By our best estimate, the incident at the temporary mission facility in Benghazi began at about 3:42 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on September 11th. The embassy in Tripoli was notified of the attacks almost immediately, and within 17 minutes of the initial reports, about 3:59 p.m., AFRICOM directed an unarmed and unmanned surveillance aircraft that was nearby to reposition overhead the Benghazi facility. My understanding is that that UAV arrived about an hour and 11 minutes after the attack had begun and was focused on the primary facility there to try to determine what was taking place. Soon after the initial reports about the attack in Benghazi were received, General Dempsey and I met with President Obama, and he ordered all available DoD assets to respond to the attack in Libya and to protect U.S. personnel and interests in the region. It's important to remember that in addition to responding to the situation in Benghazi, we were also concerned about potential threats to U.S. personnel in Tunis, Tripoli, Cairo, Sana'a, and elsewhere that could potentially require a military response. In consultation with General Dempsey and AFRICOM Commander General Ham, I directed several specific actions. First, we ordered a Marine Fleet Anti-Terrorism Secure Team, a FAST team, stationed in Spain to prepare to deploy to Benghazi. A second FAST platoon was ordered to prepare to deploy to the embassy in Tripoli. A special operations force, which was training in Central Europe, was ordered to prepare to deploy to an intermediate staging base in Southern Europe, at Sigonella. And a special operations force based in the United States was ordered to deploy to an intermediate staging base in southern Europe as well at Sigonella. Some have asked why other types of armed aircraft were not dispatched to Benghazi. The reason simply is because armed UAVs, AC-130 gunships, or fixed-wing fighters, with the associated tanking, you've got to provide air refueling abilities, armaments, you've got to arm all the weapons before you put them on the planes, targeting and support facilities, were not in the vicinity of Libya. And because of the distance, it would have taken at least 9 to 12 hours, if not more, to deploy these forces to Benghazi. This was pure and simple, in the absence, as I said, of any kind of advance warning, a problem of distance and time. Frankly, even if we were able to get the F-16s or the AC-130s over the target in time, the mission still depends on accurate information about what targets they're supposed to hit. And we had no forward air controllers there. We had no commo, no communications with U.S. personnel on the ground. And as a matter of fact, we had no idea where the ambassador was at that point to be able to kind of conduct any kind of attacks on the ground. The quickest response option available was a Tripoli-based security team that was located at the embassy in Tripoli. And to their credit, within hours, this six-man team, including 2 U.S. military personnel, chartered a private airplane deployed to Benghazi. Within 15 minutes of arriving at the annex facility, they came under attack by mortar and rocket-propelled grenades. Members of this team, along with others at the annex facility, provided emergency medical assistance and supported the evacuation of all personnel. Only 12 hours after the attacks had begun, all remaining U.S. government personnel had been safely evacuated from Benghazi. Looking back, our actions in the immediate aftermath of these attacks have been subject, obviously, to intense scrutiny and review. But let me share with you the conclusion of the Accountability Review Board, which I believe accurately assessed the situation. And I quote, "The interagency response was timely and appropriate, but there simply was not enough time, given the speed of the attacks, for armed U.S. military assets to have made a difference. Senior-level interagency discussions were underway soon after Washington received initial word of the attacks and continued throughout the night. The board found no evidence of any undue delays in decision-making or denial of support from Washington or from the military combatant commanders. Quite the contrary. The safe evacuation of all U.S. government personnel from Benghazi 12 hours after the initial attack and subsequently to Ramstein Air Force Base was the result of exceptional U.S. government coordination and military response and helped save the lives of 2 severely wounded Americans.